Okay, so we have now day 3 of the conference, and after the 2 technical days yesterday, we continue now with the second talk of commercial success for D. And this talk has a technical aspect, but also a kind of experience, a piece of experience report and an outing. We never outed we are using D before, so that's what we are doing now. We are using D, and to do this, we also analyze our code. We are happy with the error message from the compiler, but we want to know more about our code. And that's why we did a static analysis, the tool for static analysis in D. And we also want to show you our way of D, because we are using D since 2008, and I think everybody who's using D is using D in its own way, and we want to show you how we are using it. Then the 3 tools we are using D for static code analysis. We are generating metrics with D, and we are merging our code base from D1 to D2, also using D. These 3 tools get then combined in Sonar, and then the summary and the outlook from the talk. So, who are we, and what was our motivation for using D? We are a German company called Funkwerk Information Technologies. We are headquartered in Munich, in Germany, and we are one of the market leaders in passage information systems for public transportation. So every display you see is somehow controlled by a control system behind it. And they have the goal to control as many as possible displays and announcement units as possible with as less operational personnel. And just because of Sociomantic was mentioned, you are headquartered in Berlin. Whole Berlin is operated the passenger information in D. And also and also Remedy Games, Whole Finland is also controlled using D already. So we already have commercial success with D. But having a large code base in D also let us think about several coding conventions we have. We want that our code looks similar. So we are checking out the Sun microsystems rationale, and they said, well, code conventions are quite important for programmers for a number of reasons. They mentioned the maintenance costs. I think 40 to 80% are quite less. I think we have much more of lifetime costs for software. And another fact is that when you write software, I think after 1 or 2 years, then the main maintainer of the software just leaves or just has no interest on software anymore. So especially in open source, it's hardly that any software is maintained for its whole life by the original author. And they also state that code conventions improve the readability. So when you see our code base is following our own conventions, so every of our developers can understand the whole code quickly and roughly. And for open source, it's also important that if you ship your source code as a product, then you need to make sure it just looks round. And for this, code convention is also important. So D, we started with D in mid of 2008. This time was high time of D1 and Tango, so we couldn't use Phobos at all. And till this month, we are having about 250,000 lines of code in D. Just the source, Unittests about the same amount, so in total 500,000 lines of code. And we have 8 developers. And the motivation for the coding conventions comes from 3 points, mainly the developers, the language, and the team. This one for the developers. Writing clean code, this is what we do. So we have many code reviews. And it's quite a time waste, and it's also difficult if you tell somebody that he's just violating the convention, because a tool also could do this. And if you mention such things, it's even much more difficult when you mention it and you don't have a reason for the conventions. And as your team is growing, you get new employees who never had the chance to look at D before. It's also important that you split the knowledge about D and also about new features that you get with a new compiler or that you just experienced before. And as Don mentioned, you do not have D developers on the market. You just get Java guys, Python guys, C++ guys. And you can't send them to a training. You can't give them a book, except Andre's book, but it's just very less material available. And I think Walter put it in one quote on the first day, that you can't always hire perfect engineers, so put on some code conventions to make it them more easy. When you have a team, then it's also important for the team that they have a common understanding of the code. And the need for such conventions is increasing with the size of the team, with the distance of the team members, and with the cultural differences. For example, we have our headquarters in Munich. We have one guy, D, in Berlin. We have sometimes people in China helping us. So it's quite nice to have a tool for checking the main conventions and the other things we are checking by reviews. And when you see the languages, C++ evolved and has many books about how to code good C++ code. Even Java has, but I think nobody wrote all the a book on D to how code efficiently, what are the best practices. TDBL is one try, but I think it needs another book, an effective D, for example. And one of our motivation was also, we are doing safe systems. That means our customers require from us that we use a safe subset of a language. And for this, we are using sometimes when we have to C or C++ and follow the MISRA standard as a safe subset of the language. And this also gave us the inspiration to have some of these conventions in D. They, for example, say you should have all variables initialized, you should review all your code and such things. And there's also the language thing. The importance for conventions grows as the language gets more complex. When you look at C, in C you have 26 reserved words, in C++ you have 48, in Java you have nearly 100, and we are far away behind. And we are also a multi-paradigm language. That means we could use object-oriented code, we could use functional programming, and we need a way to tell the developer how to do it right. And it's also difficult that there are not many finished projects. We have Phobos, we have some libraries, but I do not know any application released and could be used as example. We do not have many books. We have no courses or training available. We just have a few rules of thumb and a few best practices. And when you look at D, then you just see D as a huge toolbox, and you can't tell the developer which tool should be used when. So let me introduce you how we are doing D. We do highly available systems that works 24/7. And due to the fact that we are doing public transportations, we have very high maintenance times for 5 years or more, 10 years or more, sometimes also 20 years or more. And when you have such situations, then your investment in code quality pays out very fast. We are using the Agile approach for development, and our main goal is to have readable, maintainable, and concise code. That means we want clean code that everybody can understand our code. This is maybe also what not everybody is using. We have asserts and invariants all over our code and also in our production release. That means we do not switch it off for production. And we are using in, out, and invariants everywhere in our code. And we are doing many tests. We are doing Whitebox tests, 2 ways, Unittests and D-unit. We're doing black box tests, and we are using AnalyzeD for static code analysis for our code base. So how we are using D? We restricted ourselves. D was too mighty for us, so we restricted it to the OO approach. And we just have one class struct interface per file. And we also said that a class is an item with a strict boundary. That means everything you put inside the class, you need to copy. When you have an array, you need to dump it, and that you can't make it dirty, the array. We are also not using ddoc because we think ddoc is missing the most important information about the functions. That means we do not have in-out constraints in ddoc, and we haven't, you have no information about the exceptional cases for functions. That means when something, some exceptions are thrown or not. And we also think that we shouldn't document inside the implementation. We use the documentation just for the interactions of our classes. That means we're using UML for modeling the interactions and using this as documentation for our code. That means we are modeling every package in a UML diagram. And then our code base every time gets synchronized with these diagrams through the Antlr Python string templates magic. And next to this, we are also modeling the package dependencies. That means we have a control package, we have a model package, we have a protocol package, and we make sure that the model package is not allowed to access functions from the control. And we also make sure that we this way do not have cyclic dependencies between packages. This also somehow increases compiling times. This is just one small example of UML model we are using. You see here 2 classes. We model just every attribute, every method we have. We even model the enumerations. And here you see the package dependencies. That we have a package called control, and this depends on the package model, but the package model do not depend on anything else, and the package control also depend on 3 other model packages. So how do we test? We whitebox test our modules, and we do this in 2 ways. The first and simple way, the private static functions, these are tested with the unit test blocks. That means for these unit tests, the unit is a function. And as we write the function, we also write the unit test directly under it to document how to use the function, how this function is working. But more complex tests, application tests, where the unit is a class or a struct, these require setups and teardowns. And also, as mentioned yesterday, you also want to have a name for for your test cases. You want to filter them, you want to select them, you want to have an error report once you run them. And for these kind of tests, we're using DUnit. DUnit was already present in D1, then this code base hasn't been emerged to D2, then a new guy came to make a new approach for DUnit in D2, but then we couldn't reach him. We wrote him emails, we wrote him GitHub patches, but we couldn't reach them. So we forked it, and here you see our link to DUnit, and it's just maintained by Super Mario. And as we execute our tests, we execute them in total. We execute them separate, that means every single test by its own, and also in every combination of two. We hadn't have the possibility of dejects, that means our code base, our unit tests sometimes set the state of a singleton or write a file, and other tests depend on it. So we make sure with the run that in every combination of two that this is not happening anymore, and this proves that the tests are running totally independent from each other. And doing the combination of two of the unit tests, we are running the test runner quite often. We are running it 50,000 times every night, and we are struggling with a crash and D runtime. When you have two threads for short-running programs, it's just very likely that this program will crash. So maybe Manu can help us to lobby this crash to get fixed. So static code analysis. We currently support just our discovered conventions. That means we did many code reviews before, and everything we found a convention, we wrote it down, and the written down conventions which could be checked automatically, we automate it with AnalyzeD. And we restricted it to our own code. That means we are using no mixins, no version, no template. And that means we are also not supporting the whole D grammar. Our goals for implementing such a tool was that next to the conventions, we also should explain to the developer why this convention is useful and why he should follow the convention. And we couldn't have the goal to have no false positives. No false positive is just a goal for Walter with the decompiler, but we could just have the goal to have as less as possible false positives. In our code base, we have none, but we are just checking our 500,000 lines of code. And it was important for us that we also have no annotations for the source code, that you don't need to write more. There you enable these conventions, and there you disable the conventions. We just have seen it from the MythRC. When you use such a tool, then every line mention there, this convention should work, they are not, and why not? And we just didn't want to have this. We want our code clean, and that the program and the developer could understand it. So we divided our coding conventions into several categories. This is still the Christmas edition, so it's quite a bit old. We have bad practices, we have coding issues, we have metric issues, we have semantic issues, and we have style issues. And I'm going to show you just some examples now. When we analyze the code, we have 4 ways. We check the source code, then we take the source code, make the token stream out of it. From the token stream, we construct the AST, and on the AST, from the AST, we do the semantic analysis, and each step could be used for several code convention checkers. So even if you can't parse the code completely, we are able to spit out some conventions. So one convention we have is, because we are using contracts quite a lot, is that the implementation also should trust the contract. We have here one method foo. It gets one object, one parameter, object O, and has a in constraint that O shouldn't be null. And it's then just an error that here you have a condition to check O is null again. It's just code that's never reached normally when you have invariants on. So this is one of the conventions we have. Then another emerging convention is, yesterday Maxime mentioned the for each. We have the conventions every time we see a for. We should think about it to replace it with a for each. And we haven't found any existence of for which you couldn't replace with for each. And as Phobos and D2 is now evolving, we also might think about changing this rule to don't allow for each anymore and instead using standard algorithm. Another one is mainly for people who are new to D. When you have and construct an item of the class, then you can write the class name foo / new object, and it's just too much information. You don't need to mention the object twice. So we have the rule to prefer auto for declarations when it's clear which types the object has. Then you should write auto to do not mention the type twice. And as we have a huge code base and do many refactorings on our code, it sometimes happens that we have unused variables. We are do not use one parameter anymore. We are not using any variable anymore. For this, we also want an error message. So you have here the int main, which gets arguments, but these arguments are not used. So you get an error message, a warning. You have the int foo, which is initialized, but not used at all. So you also get an error message. You have the bar, which is also not used. And here in the try catch block, you have the out of memory exception with the exception identifier. You do not refer to it, so you also don't need to write it here. And this is maybe one big issue also in Phobos. It's many lines in Phobos are just commented out as debug code or as maybe a kind of unit test. The output should be like this, but we in our code base do not allow this. It means we do not allow, we check every comment, and if this comment passes into AST, then we recognize it as code, and we do not allow code within comments. To make it easier for the developer to use, even for new developers, we established a page. We just have seen dpaste, and dpaste was quite cool. You insert just code, you compile it, and you can see the runtime. You can standard in something. You can get the standard out, and we are also using this. That means you can insert here your code base. You press analyze, and you then get at the line where you violate something, or when you violate in the module, then you get at the top the violations you have in the code. And we put this online, and so everybody is able to use it now. And next to the static analyzers, we also generate several metrics for our code. we do have a growing code base, and we can't check every line. We do not know every line anymore. So it means we need to find hotspots. Hotspots where reviews should be done and where bug clusters could hide. So it means we want to find methods which have just too many statements, which have a too broad interface, too many parameters, or throw too many different kinds of exceptions, too many lines for the method, a high cyclomatic complexity, and for classes, interfaces, and structs, when a class has too many attributes, too many functions, it's a bad sign. When a class has too many constructors, it is a bad sign, and also when it has too many lines. And having the AST and an abstract AST, we also can detect similarities between code. So it means we do not allow duplicated code. When code in one class or in two classes looks similar, we just give the developer a hint that he maybe should make a library function out of this. So our analyzer checks the code base, and for metric violations, we set the limits quite high, that we do not violate it so easily. So we do not allow, for example, when you have 4 control structures in each other, then as just then we mention it and say, you should think about the code, maybe you should refactor it. And this is also available on the home page, on the page. You insert your code, and then you get a diagram from the functions you have, and you see, oh, this function has cyclomatic complexity of 5, and the other one 2, and one is 20, so maybe you should refactor the 20. The function with the 20 cyclomatic complexity with the most statements, or which is just too deep. And another aspect we had with our code bases that we every time want to use is a newest compiler. That means we also stick to Tango D1 quite a long time, and then Tango get ported to D2, and we had the possibility to switch D2 to D2. But our code base was just too huge to do it manually. So we also automate this. Due to the fact that 250,000 lines of code are unit tests for us, and we're using D-unit, and D-unit from D1 to D2 is a little bit different. So our highest migration effort was in the unit tests, so we mainly concentrated on this point. And writing such a tool from D1 to D2 is just not possible, as you also can't automate C# conversion to D with a tool. So our goal was just to automate 80%, and the interesting 20% we let the developer do. So just some easy example rules. When we see in D1 code character array, we just replace it by string. We remove the parents from template calls. And as we also switch from Tango to D, we are also replacing Tango format strings with standard string format. So it's quite handy for the developer to update to D2. But we haven't quite finished the way to D2 forwards. We are still depending on Tango and currently just on XML and logging. So maybe somebody's writing standard logging and also find a way to make the Phobos XML parser a little bit faster. It's just too slow for us to use it currently. And we also inserted a point on the page for the conversion. So you also can insert your code here and just see the conversion result here. So here just the character array is replaced by the string. For many developers, this is just too much information. You do not want to know every psychometric complexity of a function, how deep it is, where the violations are. So we checked for a tool, and we found one very nice tool. It's called Sonar. And I think it's an easy way to start with coding conventions. And you guys already have several D projects out there, and they have different style, different quality, and also if you see one D project, and even in some modules they change. You also have a D style on the homepage, which defines some naming conventions, how you should declare some things, that you shouldn't use the C++ declaration styles, that you should use D declaration styles, that you should have one statement per line, that you should use spaces instead of tabs, that you should use braces on the single lines, and quite difficult to check that you should avoid overfull lines, not too many lines over 80 columns. This is quite easy to have. So we would host one Sonar. We could insert an FD project, and we could check the D style if you want. So I will show you how. When you have coding conventions, it's quite, and you have an existing code base, it's quite difficult to start. So one way to start is to just analyze the increments, or to analyze the code base and to increase the number of active conventions. So you just, at the beginning, do not allow unused variables and switch on more and more conventions as you go. And to help this, there's Sonar. Sonar is an open source web-based solution for quality checks. That means every time you commit something, it's like continuous integration. It's just continuous quality inspect your code. And it hadn't had a plugin for D. It has plugins for many other languages we're also using, C++, Java, Ruby, Python. And we wrote a plugin for D. That means now Sonar is also capable of understanding D and give you hints about coding conventions. And it's also quite handy to have Sonar, because in Sonar then you can enable project-specific settings. That means you don't need to have a static analyzer and have all the configurations there. You just have the configuration in Sonar. That means in Sonar you set up your project and set there you want to check these conventions, and in these files you want to ignore the conventions, and for this Sonar is quite handy. And this is an example of the Sonar homepage. This is just one project. It's called Nemo, and they analyze their code base, and you just get everything you want. You have a heat map, and where it's maybe red or yellow. You could check more detailed in it. You have a list of conventions. The conventions are structured into major violations, minor violations. So maybe first you check some major violations to find your bug clusters. And we think it's an easy way to introduce static analyzers to your code. To bring it to one point, we deployed these systems already to nearly all over Europe in passive information systems. That means for us, D can be used in commercial softwares. We are also merging our code base to D2. We haven't finished. We are still learning, so our D2 conventions will evolve. For example, we are still using synchronize. Synchronize is just the D1 way, and we haven't found the time to change our code base to the D2 way. And as we are using AnalyzeD, we also found several hidden bugs within our code base. And when we are now doing reviews, we do not need to mention the boring conventions the tool could check, because the developer, as its own, could use it to check the code before and then give it to the review. And the outlook is, I would like to use an available D Frontend, maybe also using Antlr. For this, it would be important for us to get a D grammar published online and updated with every release of the compiler. I don't know if this is possible. One point is also we are going to populate dlang.funkwerk.itk.com just to show other people we are using D. So this page will host our checker, our D unit, links to, we are currently doing an Antlr D runtime for D. Maybe also our model generator, which generates from UML models D skeletons. And this will also host a Sonar page where we could check other D projects. And hopefully there also will be some guy who's writing some more books on D, and maybe effective D would be a nice title. We just want to have more best practices and rules of thumb. Yeah, and that's it.
We got time for questions. So for the UML, do you actually well, the tools don't support it, I imagine, D out of the box. So do you do round trip, and do you actually model the methods? And did you get, I guess, out of 8 developers, did you get any pushback for people who just want to write code?
We are using the model to generate the skeletons. It means we are just generating the class, the attributes, and the functions. And the developer should write the body code, the implementation of the functions. And then we are using Antlr and string templates to synchronize this every time. That means once you change the model, you add a new method, then this method will be added to the D class, and the existing code just will stay there, and the developer has to add new code to the new class. And also when the developer change code, it just will stay. So yes, we synchronize it.
This is a very simple question. You've quoted some style guidelines from DLang site. One of those is not followed by everyone, and that's the curly brace, opening curly brace on its own line or not. Braces on a single line. I just wanted to ask everyone, because every code piece that I see on the forums, people use the opening curly brace on the previous line.
Well,
do you agree?
In forums, people usually do that because it means that it makes the code short. But do you do that in the code you check in is a different.
That's my question. So that's my question. Do you do that?
We've got the curly brace wars are scheduled for Sunday.
Oh, sorry. This is not a war. I just want to know what everybody prefers. No, just what do you use? That's the question.
Yeah. Next question.
Yes. So I really need a poll. Curly brace on its own line, please. Curly brace on its own line. Curly brace on the previous line. 50-50. 50-50.
Your first example about checking the constraint, this was a pretty complex task. How far does your semantic analysis actually go?
We just do a simple flow analysis. So we check is null, not is null. We check bigger zero, smaller, bigger amount, and we also check string length. So not much, but we also have simple constraints that we easily could understand the function. So this is enough for us. And
okay, so the check is specialized for some conditions. Okay.
So a quick remarks, the tool is called AnalyzeD, and if I look that into Google or whatever, I have absolutely no way to find it because I would find so much irrelevant stuff, right? Do you have a plan to make the tool more visible?
It's a great question. Reminds me of Ben's deject, which is a good keyword to search for. You just like, I don't know, destroy or something. Question?
To help get us a head start on the effective D book, did you guys discover any major effective technique that you put in your
The
guideline?
problem is we are using D since 5 years, but we never spoke to anybody. So I think we are just using D our way, and we are not sure if it's also the way you are using D. So we have some best practices, but just ours. So.
Well, you might have discovered something that's better than what everybody else is doing.
You gotta have it.
So I have a question. Is the source code to this tool available?
The problem is we do not have the model generator release. That means once you change the code, you also need to update the model. So until this is not released, I think it's also not useful to release the source code because then source code and model just run away, don't get synchronized anymore.
No, I mean the source code of this static analyzer.
Yeah. It's
Yeah. So does your code just do a lint, or it also fixes code such as auto formatting and so on?
it's just checking the code, not changing the
So
code.
at Google, we're starting to use C-length format, and it just makes productivity so much more, so much better because we don't have to spend developers' time in fixing silly, braces. I mean, it just becomes a non-issue. We just press line 9 and it fixes all your code automatically. I think we should really strive for something like this that matches Phobos guidelines, and then we don't have to waste developers' times in petty formatting issues. And if it can be done in C++, it would be much easier in D.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks again. And don't forget, if you ever visit Munich, don't use the public transportation system because, Okay, 5 minutes break.